Hello, everyone, and welcome to what we hope is the last virtual summit for Project Play. TeamSnap strongly supports the mission of Project Play and its commitment to access to sport for all youth, and we're delighted to be a sponsor of this summit. The particular program that we're going to be presenting comprises three panels. We felt it would be most interesting for this audience to share the learnings of three different kinds of constituencies within the sports ecosystem around the effect of the pandemic, what folks have learned from it, and how they see the future of youth sports moving forward and their particular roles in that. So the three panels comprise, first of all, an athlete from the Bay Area and her dad, a coach, actually a couple of coaches, and lastly, the third panel will comprise two sports organization leaders. I am delighted to welcome all of them to these panels, and once again, this audience to hear what they have to say. And I'd like to set the stage, first of all, with a little conversation with Travis Dorsch, who we funded. He's with Utah State. We funded a study he did on the effect of the pandemic on youth sports. Take it away, Travis.
Thanks so much, Dave. And first and foremost, I'd really like to offer my thanks to TeamSnap, not just for their support of this study, but just their engagement with the Aspen Institute and with Project Play and really with the youth sport community in general. It's really nice to be here today. Thank you so much. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank my two colleagues who joined this project, Dr. Jordan Blazo from Louisiana Tech University, and my graduate student, Dan Fleming from here at Utah State. So as we think about the survey, we conducted the survey by using an online panel through Qualtrics International. It was represented by 2,097 youth sport parents from the United States and Canada, and data were collected between April 13th and May 3rd this past spring, 2021. Now, some of the things that stuck out to us about the survey participants, if you look at these pie graphs here, is the sample was comprised primarily of youth sport parents from the United States, roughly 81%, as you see there, 84%, excuse me. The remaining percent from Canada, its provinces and territories. Most of these parents self-identified as being suburban and being of middle to upper middle class socioeconomic status. And if you look at the breakdown of the parents who responded to the study, as well as the young athletes whom they reported on, it was mostly mothers, again, over 60% mothers who responded to our survey, perhaps not surprising for you youth sport moms out there. And they reported primarily on young male athletes in the sample. Now, as we look at some of the goals, I think it's first and foremost important to start with why parents want their young people in sports altogether. And we've asked this question before, but never in terms of the pandemic. So when we asked parents this question in the TeamSnap survey, what you'll see here are a number of goals. And I think we all tend to think about these goals as the black box that is youth sports, right? We think about, why do our kids play? What are the benefits of playing? And what do we expect them to gain that they will then show as young people and as adults on the other side? And I think what's telling in these data is that, as you might expect, parents are demanding consumers, right? What you see here, the shaded in green, these goals are very important to a high percentage of parents, right? Building and maintaining friendships, supporting mental health, developing specific goals, skill-specific goals. All of these things are very important to parents in youth sport. Now, I think the question is fair to ask, can youth sport provide all of these outcomes for youth, specifically within the context of a global pandemic? And what we see specifically on this table here is a breakdown of reported changes, or parents' perceptions of reported changes in their youth over the course of the pandemic. And I think what's important to note, first and foremost, is that roughly 50% of parents across these four categories that you see in white at your left said that their children stayed about the same or increased greatly even in these categories: mental health, physical fitness, emotional control, and social well-being. Now, that's great news, but I guess the flip side of that, or the negative news, is that there's another 50% of parents who felt like their young people decreased greatly in these same four categories over the course of the pandemic. So what I guess we can infer from these data is that some young people, in fact, are reaping the benefits of sport even during a global pandemic, while others are not. And it's a larger question to try to better understand who are the haves and who are the have-nots. And maybe we'll get to that later on in the conversation this hour. One data point that stuck out to me was that 82% of parents actually reported that their children's screen time greatly increased during the pandemic. Now that may not be a surprise, right? A lot of young people were had screen time to engage with their school-related responsibilities. But outside of that, when we talk about engaging with their teammates and their coaches and their sport communities and organizations, when we talk about peer engagement that happens on a day-to-day basis, a number of young people were spending less time in sports, less time in free play, and more time on those screens. Now, as we put all these pieces together, and as I wrap up today, I want to share something that was very interesting to me, and it's sort of a proximity effect, if you will, of how satisfied parents were with different entities that surrounded their young people in sports. So if we start at the bottom of this table and look left to right here, these horizontal bar graphs tell us that parents were fairly happy. In fact, 3 out of 4 parents suggested that they were very satisfied with how their coaches responded to and managed the pandemic. And as we get from more proximal to more distal or further away from the athlete through their sport organizations, their communities, their states, provinces, and territories in the US and Canada, and ultimately their countries, parents became less satisfied with those responses to the pandemic as it pertained to youth sport participation. Something to keep in mind as we move forward. Now, these are just but a few kernels of data from the study. It was a large, pretty all-encompassing study, again, across the United States and Canada. So I urge you, if you'd like to dig in and learn more, to jump into this report. You can find it here at teamsnap.com/resources/back-to-play, all hyphenated there, the back to play. So again, I'd like to thank Dave for TeamSnap's support in this research and for their continued efforts to support Project Play and everything that is youth sport in the United States and Canada. And I'll sign off there and kick it back to you. Thanks so much.
Before we turn to the panel, I do have a question for you, which is lots of interesting insights from your survey, which we're delighted to have partnered with you on. My question for you is, what was the biggest surprise from the data that emerged for you?
Yeah, it's a really pertinent question. And I think one thing that's surprising to me is the calculus by which parents are deciding whether or not to get their kids back involved and to what extent, Dave. And I think, into that calculus, there are a number of variables that play into it. And one that has come out both in this data and in some of the larger data sets that we've collected for Project Play has been around this idea of risk of health concerns, right? So young people coming back to sport, there's obviously, or during the pandemic, there has been a risk of young people getting sick, getting COVID, and also for the parents who are transporting their kids to these sporting events for them to get sick as well. And then they take that to siblings or grandparents or whomever. We all know how this virus spreads. But also all those positive things that can come from youth sport participation. So both of these on both ends of the scale have been weighing into parents' calculus. And we've seen across urban, suburban, and rural communities, we've seen across levels of SES, we've seen even across racial and ethnic disparities, we've seen some differences in decision-making in whether or not kids are returning and to what extent and in what formats.
That's great insight, Travis. Thank you very much. We're going to move now to our panels. The first is going to be with an athlete from the Bay Area, Anna V, and her dad, Jay. And before we actually begin the panel itself, I have a couple of questions I'm going to ask each of the panel participants over the next 40 or 50 minutes. But we also want the opportunity, or we want to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions as well. So go ahead and type in your questions into the chat on your screen as you're watching, and we'll pick a couple of those to ask the panel participants. So thank you very much. I'd like to start off with, first of all, thank you very much, Anavi and Jay, for joining us. Great to see you. And I and the audience are going to be very interested in hearing your perspective. The first question, or even before I get to questions, can you both give just a brief introduction of yourselves?
Why don't you go first? Yeah, my name is Anavi. I play soccer in the Bay Area, like you said. I'm a junior in high school, and I have been playing since, I think, second grade.
So first of all, so Dave and TeamSnap and Dr. Dorsch, and so thanks for having us on. I was really excited about this opportunity. So just to introduce myself, I'm just a regular dad who's been schlepping this kid and my son around at various events, whether it be soccer, taekwondo, tennis, etc. So happy to be on.
Great, thank you very much. So the first question I'll ask for you, we've been in the pandemic now for the better part of 2 years, and I'm interested in the challenges you're facing today versus what you were experiencing, say, a year ago at the start of the pandemic. We're in the second round now, so to speak, the second set of seasons. So what are the challenges you're facing today versus what you faced at the onset of the pandemic?
I can go first. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I think that for me, it was really difficult to maintain a schedule because everything sort of felt out of whack. I didn't really have a set defined schedule. And it was really difficult for me to make a schedule for myself. So that was really difficult. And also, I didn't have any outlets. During the pandemic, it was really difficult to find something to actually dedicate time to because I felt very sort of not purposeful in what I was doing. But now I think that one of my problems is just having difficulty dealing with coming back. There's a lot of other priorities on my plate. And so having everything come together all at once is a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I think, Dave, a year ago, we were looking at, she was doing all sorts of, we just didn't know. It was just complete, no really lack of understanding in terms of what we can do, what we can't do. There's no vaccine and so forth. And so a lot of the teams got creative. They were doing, Zoom workouts and so forth. And I think online workouts, which worked to a certain extent. But the big concern was obviously, as I think Dr. Dorsch mentioned, what do we do in terms of ensuring children's safety? Because it's not just the immediate children, it's also the follow-on, sets of people, whether it be parents, grandparents, etc. Right. So now I think it's become, like she said, it's kind of funny. To a certain extent, we're back, and I'm really excited, by the way, believe it or not. I'm happy to be driving these kids around to practice on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays or whatever, and then games on Saturdays or Sundays. So it's been a little bit, it's been challenging, but overall I'd say, it's hopefully we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel here.
Yeah, we all hope that. How has the pandemic affected your view of the overall sports experience? Sports went to zero at the beginning of the pandemic, and we heard a lot as TeamSnap about how important sports were to them. I'm interested in your perspective. How did the pandemic, which is, we're not quite out of the woods yet, how has that affected the way you think about sports and your overall life? Start with you, Anavi.
Yeah. So first of all, the pandemic made me realize that soccer was a major priority of mine. I think before I sort of would skip out on practices. I didn't realize how important it was to my mental health, like we said earlier in the presentation. But during and after the pandemic coming back, I realized how important it was for me to have a place to go, either to be with, friends, whether it was to, relieve stress or just have some safe space that I could, be in without any worries. I think that soccer really just, it really helped me with my mental health. And throughout the pandemic, just my perspective on the importance of it completely changed.
That's great.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it kind of goes back to when we started with Anavi in team sports itself. the whole notion was to be able to provide her an outlet that obviously get some physical activity, get some movement going. But it was what we realized is that there was a certain accountability that you have when you have team sports, for example, right? Building that camaraderie, building that sense of team. She's always had this notion of, hey, I'm not gonna, I'm gonna do things. I'm gonna make sure that I don't let my team down and so forth. What I think the difference now, though, is that she's adamant about, making sure she goes to practice. She'll plan her days and so forth around it. She really looks forward to the whole notion of, hey, I'm looking for tips on how to get better. So what I've noticed is conversations with her coach, for example, both before and after the game. How did I do? Just asking for feedback. What can I do better? What can I do, not just in my position, but also in helping others as they navigate their own positions. And so I've sensed and I've seen a lot more of leadership from her. She may not be the best athlete on the field, but certainly from a leadership standpoint, I've noticed that increasing quite a bit.
That's great. The last question I have for you is, what would you like to see change in the sports ecosystem? I mean, sports in American society, in North American society, is a phenomenally positive thing, but it's not perfect. And I'm interested in your perspective about what should change as we emerge from the pandemic moving forward. Anavi?
Yeah, so I think that the pandemic has hit a lot of people really hard. And I go to, I play club soccer, and honestly, it's pretty expensive. And I think that if club sports can do something in the way of providing for underprivileged kids, whether it be by hosting, clinics or funding for their fees, I think that would make it a lot more inclusive, because other people need that outlet too. And so just giving other people more access to sports for the same reasons that I love it. I think that that's something that clubs should definitely try to think about.
Yeah, I think.
Jay, anything to add?
Yeah, I think so if there's one thing that the pandemic has taught us, that it's the use of better leveraging technology, and so making a lot more of content available, whether it be I mentioned some of the workouts that they did, just making those available, right? Just making those available to for a variety of people. One of the things that we're very passionate about is community outreach, and just making sure that there is enough community outreach. It's being able to provide that level of inclusiveness, but then also being able to provide some structure to situations or individuals who may not have access to that. So I think we could learn a lot, right? I think we can learn a lot from what the pandemic has forced upon us. I think we can find a little bit more of maybe we can do more. Maybe we can do more to educate, and maybe just do more community outreach. That would help a lot.
I agree. Never waste a good crisis. Now, a couple of questions from the audience. First one is, Anavi, tell us the experience of the pandemic for your friends as well as you. I suspect that you saw different kinds of reactions from some of your teammates. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, so I think some of my teammates felt really uncomfortable going back. I had lots of people go back at staggering times. I went back. I pushed my return out of season because I have family members who are at risk. So I didn't come back for a while. And then I had other friends who didn't come back until even later. So so everyone had differing responses. And then when, I saw players come back, there was a difference in how they played. And I think that just goes to show, I understand we didn't have a lot of practice time in the pandemic. I don't expect anyone to, but I think that some people were definitely more hesitant in how they played. And I think that the pandemic affected their confidence in their ability to play.
I think it's also impacted communication. What I've noticed is, before I would see a lot of the athletes. There we go. I would see a lot of the athletes kind of communicating amongst themselves, talking to each other. We noticed a little bit of a significant drop off on that between her colleagues. And I'm starting to see inklings of that picking back up. I think it's just a function of people being more comfortable being back in play. I think Dave is having some issues.
Hi, all. We're having some technical difficulties, and we will be back in just a second. But while we're fixing the computer right here, there was one other question, which was during the pandemic, particularly when sports were shut down, what did you guys do in terms of sport and play? What were the activities that you were enjoying?
Well, I can say that we, like my dad mentioned, we had Zoom sessions where, we would do 30, 45-minute workouts, maybe once or twice a week. But quite honestly, I think sometimes our coach made us do like yoga. So we would do meditation, or we would have to time our runs. But other than that, I think that I really slacked off during the pandemic. Like I'm sure so many other players did, just because it felt like there was no end in sight. And so I think that really affected my motivation to go work out when I didn't know when it would end.
Yeah, I mean, like, so it was interesting to hear Dr. Dorsch's comment about, screen time going up. It went infinitely up. I think it was more than the 80 some odd % that he mentioned. I think it was very challenging and difficult for people to get myself, Anavi, to be motivated to get out and go do the things that we would normally do. So it was challenging. She went from, I think you had practice, 3 to 4 days a week?
Yeah.
With a game or two on the weekends, to just a screeching halt, right? It was maybe 1 or 2 practices, and that too, I noticed that there wasn't as much participation. What we did notice is that it was interesting. What I did notice is that she would go in the backyard and just kind of kick the ball around, just juggle, just to get out and get some fresh air and so forth. But candidly, it was very, very little. I mean, it just came to a staggering halt, unfortunately.
And I'm going to invite Dave back as we fixed our tech challenges. Thanks for bearing with us, and turn the panel back over to him.
Okay, I'm going to assume people can see me, even if I can't see you, as we emerge from these technical difficulties. But I want to thank Anavi and Jay for joining us. Anavi, I know you said you were a little nervous about this, but let me just say, when I was a junior in high school, I would not have done as fabulous a job as you have done. So thank you very much, both of you. And we'll turn now to coaches.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm back, and I would like to introduce Dan Sanders and Sinead Rundle, who are coaches. And Dan and Sinead, please give the audience a feel for yourselves.
Well, thank you, Sinead. Perhaps you can go first.
All right. Well, my name is Sinead Rundle. I'm a youth soccer coach. I coach girls. I'm pretty dedicated to building confidence in my kids. I'd like to get them to high school with as much confidence as possible. So most of our focus is based on that in our development.
Fantastic.
And hello, I'm Dan Sanders. I am a youth lacrosse coach in Glen Rock, New Jersey. I coach both the boys, grade 5th and 6th, and the girls, grade 8th. But I've been coaching them since they were in 2nd grade.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I have to say that when I was in school, in college in particular, both of the sports you represent were in earlier stages, let's say. Soccer to a significant extent, but lacrosse, I went to a school where lacrosse was a popular sport. I'd never seen it before. And I remember some fraternity brothers tossing around a ball and asking me if I wanted to play. And I said, no, I'm never going to see this game again. I'm happy that I was wrong. And lacrosse and soccer have grown dramatically in the States. And I think they're both fantastic sports. So let's dive into the questions. The first question I have for you is, how has the pandemic shown you the value of mental health in sports?
You want to go first, Dan?
Sure. It's a great question. And, one of those things that it felt as if when we first started to come back out, because lacrosse was the season in the spring, at least here in the East Coast, that it got shut down amidst COVID, right? So literally we were in practice call at 6 with upcoming scrimmages in and around March. And we're still even trying to figure out exactly if we could continue to play because it was an outdoor sport, not knowing the profound nature of the pandemic that was about to hit the shore. And so to the degree, we lost that entire season. And so when it full circled the following year, we still took a tremendous amount of precautions. But the assumption was that people would just be wanting to be shot out of a cannon and come back and participate in any way they possibly could, because they were going to be on, as Dr. had mentioned, screen time to that point. So we assumed that both parents and youth would want to be out in any capacity they possibly could, especially in a sport that takes such trials and tribulations around just running and being outside. And it's always that sunny and 70 type of atmosphere. And yet at the same time, what we didn't realize that shortly thereafter, there was a lot of anxiety, and people had truly forgotten how to be a part of a team. There was a tremendous amount of social distancing still. What do we do? We're still kind of in the throes of this. And how do we stand? How do we interact? Do we have to have masks, under masks or not? And how do even children then interact? Because they've been going to school, but some of that's been virtual. And how do they then get together again as truly a team-oriented fashion outside of a Zoom or outside of a Microsoft Teams meeting? And, it quickly pivoted from us to going over the fundamentals and the basics of dusting off those sticks and getting back into play, into realizing that this was going to be an entire different burden that we had previously, and to truly try to teach these individuals it's okay, right? You can kind of still be yourself. You can still run around. You have safety here, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And what we started to do, and maybe the girls more than the boys, because they were a little bit older. They were 8th grade and the boys were 5th grade, and they just grab a stick and go hit each other, right? But the girls, to a degree, were going through a different kind of life-altering moment, and that was a much more profound experience. So for us, we quickly pivoted into the sport is secondary, the mental anguish is primary, and we want to ensure that we're teaching young girls, young women, to become mature young adults. And that was a better, something that we were unaccustomed to doing as coaches, but certainly as kind of life coaches, took the opportunity to address that as the primary function.
Fabulous. Renee, give us your perspective.
Mine's similar to Dan. So dealing with just girls, and my girls are actually very similar age to Dan's girls, just about a year younger. But there's been anxiety before the pandemic. So it's something that we always took into account. Once they came back, I think the rules weren't always very clear. So your bags had to be 6 feet apart, or you had to stand in a square that was 6 feet apart. And then the next month you were able to play in a pod, and then you were able to do something different. So I think for them, they were just confused. And they never wanted to mess up. They never wanted anyone to think that they weren't taking it seriously, or that they weren't following the rules. That's sort of who they are innately. So it took a little bit of time to get them back into just feeling like a team again, and that they weren't disappointing anybody, and that life was going to move on, and soccer was soccer, as it always was and always will be.
That's great. One of the interesting stats that emerged from Travis's survey was the tremendous amount of trust that parents have for their coaches. Did you feel that this past couple of seasons?
I did.
Nate, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like they gave us their children and really hoped for the best coming back. And again, like the anxiety and the comfort levels of each kid was very different. So you had to balance that out within the team and make everybody feel comfortable however they were. But I think that the comfort level with the parents and us comes a lot with them being able to ask questions and feeling like their questions are heard and that they're answered. So as you back away into bigger and more separated organizations, those questions aren't necessarily answered just as quickly or as thoughtfully. And when you're invested in the kids to such an extent, I think they really feel like you're listening and you have their best interest at heart.
Yeah, I think that I concur. And I think that from a youth recreation program, it's different because we're parents, right? And they know us to have children on the team. So they know that we're parents first. And that helps a lot with coaching. And to the degree that they know that we wouldn't put anything or anyone in jeopardy was, I think, reassuring and provided them the confidence to provide, to give their children over to the care of what we were trying to accomplish. And to that degree, it felt like we quickly went from the much gratitude and so blessed to be able to be out there and continuing life as if this is the new normal to a degree. But equally, then that shifted quickly to how can my son or my daughter get better, right? So that's when you knew that we were starting to pivot towards back to the reality of what can I do now to then, okay, that's great. We're safe, we're sound, we're confident, appreciate your Ted Lasso-like coaching style and just providing that constant, positive, we believe mentality that we'll go through this into now, let's get better as a team and let's kind of mature forward. So that was always great to see.
It is a phenomenal service that you and your colleagues are performing to youth in America. And I certainly benefited from coaches I had growing up. And it's a testimonial to the relationships you've established that trust is so high. So hats off to you. One last question for me before we dive into questions from the audience. Sinead, you talked about how, and we all experienced this, how shifting guidelines and mandates made it difficult to know what to tell people. And I'm interested in how those still shifting mandates and restrictions are affecting the return to sport right now.
Well, for me, I found that even when you talk about the survey and how parents want their kids to have fun, I find like the bottom of the foundation of that is stability. So for kids to have this set schedule, these set rules, that was a really, really big part of them having fun. So for my kids to take away those rules was such an instability for them that's kind of where everything fell apart. So we created stability within other ways. We made sure that practice time was always there. It was always set. We did other things that gave them like position stuff and team stuff. We started new chants. We started things that gave them this feeling that those rules were never going to give them anymore. So until everything goes back to normal, we kind of just shifted to a different point of stability.
Mm-hmm. Dan, any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, and I'm unbiased, but TeamSnap was a lifesaver. And I often said that I wanted my entire life organized through it because the fact that you could put multiple teams up, because I was constantly changing practices. We went through a COVID social distance in the middle of one of our seasons when
I got to say that we did not pay Dan to say that.
Yeah, that's on my own. And I am a big fan. I literally wish I could remove Microsoft Outlook and put my entire calendar on Snap. It'd be a lot better because I'd know where I need to be. And to the degree that we were constantly updating and informing parents because there was changes. And within my youth boys lacrosse team, talk about rules, we had so many boys, high class problem to have, that we had to pod the individual teams and only bring 2 pods of the 3 into a game. They could all practice together, but we had to have, it was too many players for one team, not enough for 2. And so we literally had to inform consistently the players and their parents of the changes, because a town might go through a COVID restriction and have to postpone a game, or we ourselves would have to have a girl that was need to be social distance in quarantine. So who else was affected and who can come to practice and who cannot, and all the different safety checks that you could do. And having that as a background, just people knowing where they needed to go and where to be and what the timing was, and we could update that on the fly, and they would receive that via email or on their mobile device, was taking advantage of that increased mobile electronification. So that really did save us, and I'm not kidding about that. And so outside of that, the communication style certainly, it taught us to keep it to the simple basics and not overindulge information, because then it would turn into a daunting task. So just do the one thing at a time. And to be cliche from a very good coaching standpoint, eat the elephant one bite at a time. Get better, and get better. And we try to compartmentalize all those thoughts.
Yeah, it does make sense that, especially during uncertain times, communication is even more critical. And focusing on that is a major benefit. I have one final question from the audience, and then we'll move on to the next panel. But the final question is, I've been hearing that there's at least concern, I don't know if this is reality, but there's a concern that a period of inactivity or less sports could lead to more injuries because athletes' bodies are just not used to being pressed as much. Is that a concern in your minds? And if so, how do we mitigate that? Sinead, you want to start?
Well, there have been a lot of injuries recently. I feel like there's a lot of kids walking around in boots right now or slings. So there's got to be some credibility to that. I also think we went from kids that were 10 to kids that were 12 very quickly. And there's a growth in there. And there's developmental things in sports that they might have missed that would help them not get injured. So I think maybe backtracking just a bit, teaching them how to stretch, teaching them a good warm up that they may have missed along the way could benefit them.
Or forgotten.
Right.
Yeah. There's no doubt. I put myself into that realm, and by no means a spring chicken, but from a weekend warrior perspective myself now, I realize that when I try to go out and push myself after being inactive for even 5 days or longer, I know that my body feels the ramifications and the consequences thereafter. So just knowing that, stretching and or preparing and doing things like high intensity interval training, that for getting the heart rate up to prepare for these things. But I also think that the muscles and the bones, to Sinead's exact point, have just grown. And their mind is telling them they can do one thing, but their body is telling them a completely different thing because they're not accustomed to being in the shape of their now new bodies. And so it's just kind of preparing them through that. So I don't know what would be the preventative nature of what to do if we had hindsight being 2020 and look back. But I do think going forward, you have to be prepared for making sure that we take things a lot slower than we had in the past. They are still youth. They do snap back like a rubber band. So we certainly shouldn't be overprotective of trying to get them out and run and jump and win. But at the same time, I think there's something absolutely credible to be said about the amount of injuries that have increased exponentially.
Yeah, makes total sense. I'm with you, Dan. I'm not a spring chicken, but I'm relearning the necessity of stretching before and after exercise myself. Well, we're going to move on to the next panel, but let me reiterate what I said earlier, which is, and I'll speak for the entire audience here. We can't say enough about how much we appreciate what you do on a day-to-day basis for kids. And it's a big deal. You're affecting their lives tremendously in a positive way. And I thank you. And I thank you also for appearing today.
Thank you very much.
It's an honor and a privilege.
Likewise. Great. So for the next session and the last one we'll have during this part of the program, we're going to be discussing a couple questions with 2 sports organization leaders the two Lukes, I like to refer to them as. So I'm going to start off with Luke Zients. And Luke, why don't you tell folks what you do, and then we'll move to Luke Taylor.
Yeah, thanks. I'm the CEO of NCSA. We were recently acquired by Endeavor, so also part of the IMG Academy. So our worlds span the Academy, which is obviously a private school and camps, and Path to College recruiting. And historically, we also managed NFL flag football.
Great.
Dave,
Luke?
my name is Luke Taylor. I develop sports facilities across the country. And we also develop the associated sports clubs that go in there. We have teams that compete in 12 different sports and have thousands of them across the country. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, delighted to have you both here. You are both thought leaders in the sports community, and I am sure our audience is very interested in your perspective. The first question I have is, what are some of your major insights about youth sports over the course of the pandemic?
LT, you want to kick that off?
Sure. Well, I guess the first takeaway that I found is how fast sports really come back once the pandemic ends.
Mm-hmm.
When we were early into this, everyone's looking at their budgets, everyone's looking at participation. Are we open? Are we closed? What can we do? And you're planning for the worst and hoping for the best. And I'm happy to say that the best has happened. Our numbers are and participants are much higher now than they were even in 2019 when we before this whole pandemic thing happened. Second thing is, while I always knew this because I'm in this industry and I visit with parents and players and coaches constantly, I didn't realize how important youth sports are to parents and their players. It might in fact be more important to the parents. They want what's best for their children, and as a result, this was a critical piece that was missing out of everyone's lives for a little while. And even from the parent side, their whole social network is a lot of times based around their kids' sports. They travel on vacation. They go to tournaments, and that's kind of their vacation side of things. And then probably the third thing that I really I guess realized at this point, and we're still dealing with, is how fragile the youth sports ecosystem really is. We have facilities in multiple places in the country. The political climate in some are very different than others. We host a lot of national type tournaments where you have kids and teams coming from, say Texas or Florida and coming to play, say, in Colorado, and the rules are a lot different here, and people are they get very angry when they can't do what they want to do, like a mask mandate or something along those lines. We also have a number of teams that participate at the junior hockey level. And, we've had conversations about mandating vaccines for our players, because a lot of our teams, they go to Canada and they can't get in unless they do that. And I've been very surprised at people's reactions to what they believe in terms of everything around COVID, whether it's masks, whether it's vaccines, whether it's wanting to participate in this or not. And there's not a lot of gray area in that. I mean, people are pretty well on one side or the other, and it's a percentage, and it kind of depends on your location. So if you're in a more, I would guess, say, democratic area, people are a little bit more on the vaccines and the masks, and if you're not, they're really against them. But there's always that percentage on as part of your group, and even down at the team level. So we were running into stuff where if there's a mask mandate, say for hockey, an indoor sport, you would have some of the kids that were supposed to play in a mask, and they pull them down, they can't breathe, whatever. And we'd have parents on our team report the other kids to the health department because they weren't following the rules 100%. So it's a very, very fractured I don't know, society, and fractured fractured.
I would say that fracture is limited to sports. To take a page from your book here, Luke Science, I'll refer to you now as LZ.
Perfect.
So your turn.
Yeah, I'll just go through a few bullets. I think the headline is, much like the rest of the world was unprepared for the pandemic, and didn't have adequate planning, it didn't have adequate supply chain infrastructure set up. Youth sports kind of reacted the same way. Historically, youth sports operators don't really coordinate together or talk to each other. We don't do a lot of scenario planning for stuff like this. So when the pandemic happened, I think most of us were like, what do we do? There's no binder to pull off the shelf. And so we kind of jumped into it, and some things like mental health, which was discussed a number of times, in April of this year, I think something like 47% of all adults in the country were were in therapy. And it was hard to get therapy for kids, hard to find solutions. And I think we all went through this process of trying to figure out what to do, which included, how do you help kids with mental health? We just realized that, hey, this is going to be an issue. How do we find fields? How do we do all these things? And we just weren't prepared. So, item number one is, we just need to do scenario planning, be prepared, think through these things. That was kind of an observation that is going to change how we do business. I agree with Luke. Short-term demand for youth sports seems somewhat inelastic. All the numbers we've seen from 2019 jumping ahead to 2021 are similar or greater. 2021 is better. I think there's long-term trends, which are not good. But in the short term, parents realized all the things we've been telling them about sports being transformative is true. They want to get their kids out of the house. I want to get my kids out of the house. Kids are back. It's not true in all cases. It's more true in for-profit sports than nonprofit. I think nonprofit, rec sports, and others have struggled to get fields. The risk profile of schools opening and giving fields, nonprofit institutions opening and giving fields, very different than for-profits who essentially did whatever they needed to do to get a place to play. So there's kind of like a different risk tolerance, which was an easy observation. Just a couple other quick things. One, consolidation. I don't know if anybody noticed, but there's a lot of acquisitions during the pandemic. Operators were scared. PPP worked for some people, didn't work for other people. Groups that were on the fence financially got consolidated to a great extent. We made a handful of acquisitions. There's some groups that made dozens of acquisitions. And I think that we have to kind of keep an eye out on how the acquisition landscapes and consolidation of youth sports kind of affects the kids at the end of the day. Is it good? Is it bad? Not sure. Just one last point, and I know this is near and dear to Aspen, is that I don't know if you all noticed this in your neighborhood, but the one thing that we saw is that play increased a lot as organized sports stopped. You couldn't get this goes back to the supply chain again. Like it was hard to buy bicycles, hard to buy skateboards, hard to buy bike parts, but all of a sudden in all of our neighborhoods, you saw kids out on their bikes. I saw kids in my neighborhood I'd never seen before. So I guess the short story is that we were wildly underprepared. I'll speak for our company. We survived. We actually thrived during it, made some adjustments. IMG Academy shut down camps, but was able to harbor the WNBA and kind of made a shift. I know a lot of other operators that were able to make a shift and get through it. Now I kind of think we need to think, okay, well, what's the long term? How do we make sure that all kids still get, a chance to play?
Yeah, which Project Play, TeamSnap, and all of us are committed to, allowing access for anyone to play sports, not just those that have the means to participate in the for-profit, often elite organizations. So last question from me for you, which is how are the changing rules and mandates affecting the way that you approach providing the services you provide moving forward?
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, LT.
All right. Well, the hardest part for us has been just understanding what all of the guidelines and changes and regulations that are going around here, and how those translate between different locations, different countries, different sports. Some places have waivers and they're granted certain exceptions to be able to do things, whereas other places they're not. It's so from our standpoint that the hardest part has been just trying to navigate through what what you can do, what you can't do, and keep everyone safe in the meantime. And frankly, a lot of the different rules that have come into place don't make a lot of sense to me. But they are what they are, and you need to deal with it and make it still the best experience as easy as you can. So communication is huge for us and during this time, because things are changing all the time, and you got to be flexible. Just roll with the punches. That's probably one of the biggest things I've learned.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on it. So for us, it's kind of a long list. We have a handful of different businesses. Foremost for us is just this realization that we need to all work together. Youth sports needs to be more of a strong community. We can get involved in this Play Sports Coalition, which Aspen's also involved in. So that's one. The second is, even though we're for profit, it's clear that every kid should have a right to play. So we're trying to rethink through the mechanisms within our own business to make sure that our give back is kind of at the level that gives us the right impact on society that we want. So if kids want to approach our services and get them free or whatever that is, how do we do that? We've always had a strong ethic in that, but making sure that we don't leave lower income kids behind in our business and all our business is super important. We've really thought about expanding our solution set to include more mindset, more nutrition, more habits, more multi-sport, a lot of things that we hadn't done in the past that the pandemic has realized, there wasn't a supply chain built for this stuff before. There wasn't infrastructure, and we need to, and we can see how important that stuff is. And our kids were begging for it. So even in the midst of the pandemic in the early days at NCSA, we do hundreds and hundreds of webinars, and they have tens of thousands of kids that participate every month. And we shifted a great number of those to things like mindset and just conversations between kids. And I think that helped a lot, but it's just, kind of scratching the surface of it. The other thing is, just as we're thinking about our businesses is we realized how, especially while we're watching our kids out on their bicycles in the neighborhoods and just hanging out with each other, it was just kind of a great reminder of how important fun is. And we've kind of just stepped back and said, this is just a great opportunity to reimagine how do you bring the s'mores back into the camp. And it's not just, stretching and dunking baskets all day. And how do you make all these experiences fun and break it up and let kids be kids? So there's probably a longer list, but it's all of those things and more.
Great insights. A couple questions from the audience now. One is, do you believe that brand partnerships have a role in your business and in bringing unique experiences to athletes and their families?
I'll give a quick answer, Luke, if I may.
Sure.
So for us, we've been light on them in general, but we've selected great brand partners that we felt like can help our kids in a couple of ways. One is they were kind of aligned to what the kids were looking for. And also, youth sports is one of those things where for most of us, it ain't that profitable, right? And we always have this tension of like, how do you deliver more for these kids without charging them more? How do you deliver more for them and still make them inclusive to lower income families? So brand partners can help with that. They can create, we run a Rivals football series, combine series that is supported by brands, and it's free to everybody that comes out to it. And if we didn't have brands, it wouldn't be free, and there'd be tens of thousands of kids that wouldn't get to have that opportunity. So it's always about the right balance, but I think they are important.
I agree, Luke. We have a couple partnerships with some national brands. Probably our biggest one would be with Under Armour, and we've developed we call it the Under Armour Championship Series. So it's essentially national tournaments that are part of the Under Armour umbrella, and we've rolled them out in baseball, softball, and in hockey at this point. They already had a big presence on the basketball side, so we've kind of modeled it off of that, but we've taken it and moved it along. But having a partner like that certainly gives some unique opportunities to people. We get some of their D1 coaches. They sponsor several universities to come out and do coaching clinics for our staff, to do some camps for our kids. On the recruiting side, they're looking at those kids. So there's a lot of unique things that you can do if you have a partnership with a national type brand that has some different things to offer than traditionally what you'd find in the local sports environment.
We have been talking quite a bit about mental health and athletes. What we haven't talked a lot about is mental health and coaches. Is this an issue that there should be more focus on from your perspective? Let's start with you, LZ.
Yeah, so absolutely. I threw out that statistic that 47% of all adults in America in April were in some sort of therapy, and most coaches are adults, and they kind of fall into that. So all of us struggled, and all of us struggled on our own, and it was greatly exacerbated when there's people that surround us that were struggling as well, right? And it kind of has to. So within our group, we've done a lot to offer mental health days for our coaches, offer webinars, offer other outside support, time off. We've tried all sorts of things. Honestly, I don't know what's worked more than what hasn't, but we've kind of thrown everything at it we could think of.
LT.
Yes, I echo that. Our coaches are first and foremost, they're humans, they're people, they're feeling the same stresses that the rest of us are feeling during the last couple of years. And I think that the thing that we've really tried to do is try to interject some more fun into the process, whether it's more team building, getting out and doing some things, additional coaching seminars, bringing in speakers to talk to them, but trying to really Ted Lasso, I guess this is the best example. I mean, that's perfect timing when that show came out, but try to really uplift and build upon the base that we have, because they're feeling the same way the rest of us are. It's a hard time right now, or at least it was. It's getting better.
Yeah, it is getting better. Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of the time we've had allotted. Fascinating discussion that I personally could continue for hours, but we don't have that. So I'm going to thank you two for participating, and I'm going to close this portion of the overall program. And I'll just say, first of all, for me personally, the pandemic upset all of our lives, but there is a silver lining. We discussed this during the course of the past hour, and the silver lining has been the growth in recognition of the importance of sports, and specifically youth sports, in our society. All the positive benefits have been, if anything, highlighted during this crisis, and the determination of everyone at all levels, the coaches, the athletes, the parents, and sports organizations, and the companies that serve that ecosystem, has really been admirable in terms of just seeing what people can do when they work together, even during a crisis like the pandemic. So that's been great to see. I want to thank all the participants in our panel. I hope that this session has been interesting and insightful, and I want to thank you all for tuning in.